You can give someone your loyalty, your time, your patience, even your dignity, and they may still look at you as if you mean nothing. That is the part that hurts the most. Not just the pain, but the shock of it. You gave so much, and somehow it still was not enough. When that happens, a very real emotional pattern often begins. It is quiet at first, hard to name, easy to ignore, but it slowly wears down even the strongest person. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the more you gave, the less you mattered? If that hits something deep inside you, stay with me, because this may explain what you have been feeling for a long time. When a person gives everything in a relationship, care, understanding, patience, forgiveness, and sacrifice, they are usually loving from a very relational place. They believe effort means love. They believe staying means love. They believe if they show enough heart, enough honesty, enough consistency, the relationship will become safe and steady. In the beginning, a self-centered person may respond strongly to that kind of love. They may admire it. They may seem deeply moved by it. Your attention feeds them. Your care comforts them. Your loyalty makes them feel powerful and secure. But then something changes. What once felt special to them starts to feel normal. What felt rare starts to feel expected. And once it becomes expected, it often stops being valued. That is where the real imbalance begins. You give more. They notice less. You try harder. They become more distant. And without realizing it, you begin to pour your whole self into keeping alive something that is no longer being shared equally. The person who gives keeps thinking love can fix it, that more patience will help, more understanding will calm it, more effort will bring back the closeness that once felt real. So they explain more, they forgive more, they carry more, they keep adjusting, hoping that if they become just a little softer, a little wiser, a little more careful, the relationship will settle again. But instead of creating more connection, this often creates a dangerous pattern. The more stable and giving one person becomes, the more that stability gets taken for granted. The emotional work becomes invisible. It is always there, so it is no longer seen. It becomes background noise. And at the same time, the other person may struggle deeply with true emotional reciprocity. They may want admiration, attention, control, comfort, or reassurance, but not the kind of vulnerability that asks them to meet you at the same depth. So your consistency is not mirrored back. Your care is received, but not returned with the same honesty. Your love becomes something they expect, not something they protect. And because you are still invested, you begin to think the problem must be you. Maybe you are not communicating well. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you need to love better. So you push harder instead of stepping back. And little by little, love stops feeling like a shared bond and starts feeling like one-sided maintenance. That is a painful place to live in. It drains you slowly. It confuses you deeply. And if you have lived this, you already know how exhausting it is to keep trying to hold together something that only one person is truly carrying. Keep listening, because this is where many people start losing themselves without even noticing. After the early phase, where you may have felt admired, wanted, even deeply chosen, a shift often begins. It is not always loud. It is not always obvious. In fact, that is what makes it so unsettling. The same qualities that were once praised, your warmth, your loyalty, your willingness to understand, slowly begin to get reframed in a negative way. What was once called caring may now be called too much. What was once called patient may now be called weak. What was once welcomed may now be treated like a burden. And the change usually comes in small pieces. A comment here, a cold reaction there, a strange tone, a little criticism that sounds like concern, a little disappointment that leaves you feeling off balance. It is subtle enough that you question yourself before you question the pattern. And because you are still holding on to the memory of how good it once felt, your mind keeps trying to connect the two versions of the same relationship. You remember the warmth. You remember the closeness. You remember feeling seen. So when the emotional tone changes, you naturally start asking what you did wrong. You start watching yourself more closely. You become careful with your words, careful with your reactions, careful with your needs. You start editing yourself just to avoid disapproval or withdrawal. This is how emotional erosion begins, not with one big moment, but with repeated small moments that teach you to shrink. You tell yourself that if you just adjust enough, the good version will come back. But the rules keep changing. What worked last week does not work now. What felt safe yesterday feels risky today. And over time, you stop linking love with acceptance. You begin linking love with correction. That changes something deep inside a person. It does not just affect how you see the relationship, it starts changing how you see yourself. Then comes one of the most destabilizing parts of all. Your reality starts being questioned, not always in dramatic ways at first, but in small ways that slowly pull you away from your own inner clarity. You remember what happened, but you are told that is not how it happened. You remember the tone, the look, the silence, the dismissal, but you are told you are overreacting, reading too much into it, being too emotional, or making problems out of nothing. At first, you argue with it. You try to explain yourself. You repeat the moment as clearly as you can. But when this happens again and again, something begins to fracture inside. Human beings depend on relational feedback to help confirm reality. We look at the people closest to us and trust that they will reflect back something honest. But when the reflection becomes distorted, confusing, or invalidating, self-doubt starts growing fast. You begin asking yourself if maybe you remembered it wrong. Maybe your feelings are too intense. Maybe you misunderstood what was said. And that is how trust in your own perception begins to erode. Not overnight, slowly, quietly, painfully. You start softening your concerns before you speak. You leave things unsaid. You avoid certain topics because the cost of being dismissed feels heavier than the relief of being honest. You begin checking your own reactions before you even express them. And in time, you may rely more on the other person's version of events than on your own direct emotional experience, even when something inside you still says, "This does not feel right." That inner split is exhausting. You still feel discomfort, but you stop trusting what the discomfort means. Instead of treating your feelings like useful information, you start treating them like something dangerous, something unreliable, something that needs to be hidden or corrected. And once a person loses confidence in their own internal signals, they become much easier to keep trapped inside a reality that never stops shifting. Emotional exhaustion does not usually arrive in one dramatic collapse. It builds through constant effort that nobody else can see. You are not only carrying your own pain, you are also trying to manage the emotional temperature of the whole relationship. You are thinking ahead. You are reading moods. You are trying to prevent conflict before it starts. You are trying to repair tension quickly. You are adjusting your tone, your timing, your needs, your expression, all to keep things from getting worse. This is not simple stress. This is ongoing emotional labor. And over time, it becomes a full-time internal job. You start over-functioning in the relationship. You explain yourself too much. You apologize just to restore peace. You try to frame things gently so they will be heard. You rehearse conversations in your mind. You analyze every reaction. On the outside, that can look like maturity, loyalty, even strength. But inside, it feels like living in constant vigilance. The hardest part is this. All that effort still does not create real safety. It does not lead to stability. It does not bring lasting clarity. The goalposts keep moving. What was fine yesterday becomes a problem today. What was appreciated in one moment gets criticized in the next. So your mind stays trapped in a loop, always searching for the right version of you that will finally make the relationship calm. But that version never arrives because the instability was never really about your wording, your timing, or your effort. Eventually, your body starts carrying the truth your mind is still trying to solve. You feel heavy, you feel drained, you lose motivation to express yourself, you feel disconnected from your own needs because keeping the relationship working has become the priority. Even rest stops feeling restful because your mind never fully leaves the tension. And one day you realize you are not just tired. You are emotionally worn down to the point where even basic self-expression feels like work. If this feels familiar, do not scroll past that feeling. That recognition matters. And then something else often happens, something many people do not notice until they are already deep inside it. Your world gets smaller. Isolation in this kind of dynamic is often subtle. It does not always begin with direct control or clear demands to cut people off. It usually starts with emotional depletion. You are so busy trying to understand, fix, calm, or survive the main relationship that you have less energy for everyone else. Friends feel harder to respond to. Family feels harder to explain things to. Social plans begin to feel like effort you cannot afford. You cancel more. You withdraw more. You stop sharing what is really happening because it feels too complicated, too draining, or too embarrassing to put into words. Sometimes there are also quiet messages that push this isolation further. Outside relationships may be minimized. Other people may be framed as unhelpful, disloyal, dramatic, or unnecessary. You may begin to feel that no one else really understands, or that talking about what is happening would be unfair, or that if you were stronger, you would not need outside support. Bit by bit, that becomes an internal excuse to pull away, even when nobody directly told you to. And once your external connections weaken, the relationship becomes your main emotional reference point. That makes the dependency stronger, not always through force, but through lack of alternatives. Without outside perspective, it becomes harder to reality check what is happening, harder to notice patterns, harder to hear your own instincts over the noise of confusion. The emotional world narrows. Fewer voices are speaking into your life. Fewer mirrors are reflecting your truth back to you. And because of that, the relationship starts feeling even more central, even when it is the very thing causing the pain. This is why isolation is so powerful. It does not only remove support, it also weakens perspective. And when perspective fades, unhealthy dynamics can start feeling normal. Stay with me, because this next part is where everything begins to shift. There often comes a point where the internal system can no longer keep carrying the contradiction. You have invested so much, you have explained so much, you have adjusted so much, but the emotional return still does not match what you have given. At some point, your mind and body stop being able to pretend that more effort will fix it. And when that happens, one of two things often begins. For some people, it feels like burnout. Emotional and physical systems start shutting down as a form of protection. The things that once triggered intense reaction now feel distant, not because you no longer care, but because your nervous system has been overloaded for too long. The urgency to repair everything starts fading. The desire to keep proving, fixing, or understanding starts weakening. There may be numbness, fatigue, emotional flatness, a sense that you simply cannot keep doing this at the same level anymore. For others, the shift happens through clarity. Not in one dramatic movie scene, but slowly, like fog lifting. The same contradictions that once felt confusing begin to look obvious. The same patterns you once tried to excuse begin to feel predictable. What you once called miscommunication starts to look like a repeated relational pattern. What you once blamed on your own flaws starts to reveal itself as something structural, something that did not change no matter how much love, patience, or sacrifice you offered. That clarity can be painful because it asks you to let go of a hope you may have held for a very long time. The hope that if you loved harder, understood better, or stayed longer, the relationship would become mutual. Realizing that the imbalance was not temporary can shake you deeply, but it also opens the door to truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is often the first step toward emotional freedom. This is the turning point. The moment the pattern stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling undeniable. Alongside that shift, many people begin to notice another painful loss. They do not just feel drained, they feel unfamiliar to themselves. Loss of identity and loss of self-trust happens slowly in these dynamics. It usually starts with small compromises that seem harmless in the moment. You choose your words more carefully. You avoid certain subjects. You soften your feelings. You hide reactions that may lead to conflict. At first, these adjustments seem practical, but over time, they stop feeling like choices and start becoming automatic survival responses. You no longer ask, "What do I truly feel?" You ask, "What is safest to say?" You no longer ask, "What do I need?" You ask, "What will keep the peace?" That shift matters. It creates a distance between your inner world and your outer behavior. And if that happens for long enough, you can begin to lose contact with your own emotional center. You may still be functioning. You may still be working, talking, showing up, doing daily life, but inside you feel less solid, less clear, less like yourself. At the same time, self-trust starts fading. When your reality has been questioned again and again, your own instincts begin to feel shaky. You second-guess what used to feel obvious. You look outward for confirmation on things you once would have known internally. Even small decisions may start feeling confusing. Was that hurtful, or am I just too sensitive? Was that unfair, or am I expecting too much? That kind of inner instability changes the way a person moves through life. Identity begins to fragment. You may notice that you act very differently in different spaces, not because you are naturally flexible, but because you are always trying to stay emotionally safe. And one day you may realize you do not fully know who you are outside the relationship dynamic. That realization is painful. But it is also important because you cannot rebuild what you have not first seen clearly. When the collapse or clarity deepens, grief often enters the picture. And this grief is layered. It is grief for the relationship you thought you had, grief for the version of the future you imagined, grief for the effort you gave so freely, grief for the time, energy, and emotional faith you poured into something that did not hold you the same way in return. Many people think grief only comes after physical separation, but that is not true. Sometimes the deepest grief begins while you are still there, while you are still trying, while part of you already knows the truth but has not fully accepted it yet. This grief is not just about losing a person, it is about losing a story. The story that said, if you stayed loving enough, patient enough, wise enough, the relationship would eventually become safe. Letting go of that story can feel like the ground shifting underneath you, but it also creates room for something honest to grow. As the illusion weakens, you slowly begin turning inward again. You begin listening to your own body, your own sadness, your own exhaustion, your own wisdom. You begin noticing what you have been carrying and what it has cost you. You begin separating your identity from the relationship itself. You start understanding that the confusion did not mean you were weak. The overfunctioning did not mean you were broken. The pain did not mean you failed. It meant you were trying to survive inside a pattern that kept asking you to betray your own reality. That understanding changes everything. It softens shame. It loosens self-blame. And even if the path forward is still unclear, there is usually one quiet truth beginning to return. I cannot keep abandoning myself just to stay connected to someone else. That sentence may sound simple, but for many people, it is the beginning of recovery. What this whole pattern reveals is bigger than one difficult relationship. It shows what happens when steady emotional investment is met with inconsistency, invalidation, or disregard over a long period of time. When you love deeply, you are not just offering affection. You are offering trust. You are offering safety. You are offering a shared emotional reality. And when that is not respected, the damage does not stay on the surface. It moves inward. It changes the way you think, the way you feel, the way you interpret yourself. That is why confusion in these situations is not a sign of weakness. It is often the natural response to prolonged emotional contradiction. The mind struggles when it keeps receiving mixed signals: care and coldness, closeness and distance, praise and dismissal, warmth and disregard. The nervous system does not know where to settle when the ground keeps changing. So you start overthinking, you start over-explaining, you over over-giving. Not because you are too much, but because you are trying to create stability in a place that does not naturally provide it. And still, despite all that confusion, clarity can return. It may not come all at once. It may arrive in flashes, in moments, in one hard realization at a time. But when it does, it is not the end of you. It is the beginning of reorganization, the beginning of internal truth rising above emotional noise, the beginning of seeing patterns for what they are instead of what you hoped they would become. This is the part many people miss. Clarity is not cruelty. It is not bitterness. It is not failure. It is self-respect coming back online. It is your inner world rebuilding structure after too much distortion. And even if that process begins in pain, it is still movement towards something healthier, steadier, and more real. The deepest truth in all of this may be the simplest one. Love should not require self-abandonment. Real connection does not ask you to disappear in order to stay close. It does not demand that you silence your instincts, reshape your personality, doubt your feelings, and carry the whole emotional weight alone just to keep the bond alive. If a relationship repeatedly asks you to lose yourself so that it can continue, the problem is not the depth of your love. The problem is the imbalance of the exchange. That is a hard truth, but it is also a freeing one, because once you see that clearly, the path forward starts changing. It stops being about proving your worth to someone who keeps missing it. It stops being about finding the perfect explanation that will finally make them understand. It stops being about waiting for a level of reciprocity that has not shown up despite all your effort. Instead, the path becomes about returning to yourself, about rebuilding trust in your own perception, about recognizing your feelings as valid data, not problems to erase, about restoring boundaries, about remembering your preferences, your voice, your pace, your needs, about learning again what healthy connection feels like. Not chaotic, not confusing, not earned through self-erasure, but calm, mutual, honest, safe. If you have been through this, hear this clearly. Your confusion does not make you weak. Your grief does not make you foolish. Your exhaustion does not mean you failed. It means you stayed too long in a space where love was not being honored in a healthy way. But even now, there is still a way back, back to your center, back to your clarity, back to your own life. And sometimes the first real step is simply this: telling yourself the truth without minimizing it, without excusing it, and without leaving yourself out of the story anymore.